What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Guys, what is going on? It's week 11 cashing points. Graham Barfield couldn't make it tonight, so I will be hosting. Ryan Heath is joining us for his cashing points debut. And as always, we have the wonderful high-low. Tons to get into this week, so let's just dive right in. Starting things off with a pretty gross game. Green Bay Packers at the Chicago Bears. Green Bay favored by 5.5 in this one. Total is 40.5. Only major injury note here is that Marshawn Lloyd was tracking to play, woke up this morning with appendicitis. He will not be active, probably out another month or so. Jair Alexander also questionable for this one. I don't have a lot of plays that I feel strongly about in this contest. DeAndre Swift is popping a bit in projections. Hilo, I'll throw it over to you to start. Do you have any love for this game? Any love for the plays here?
Not really. This is one of the few games on the slate where I've almost completely crossed off. I'll just avoid it in GPPs. There's so much uncertainty with the Bears. The last time we saw Thomas Brown as an offensive coordinator was the last 10 games of the 2023 season with the Carolina Panthers. We all know how famously poor that season went for them. So what Brown comes from Sean McVay coaching tree. So at least we know like kind of his upbringing. He coached as a running back coach under Sean McVay for 2 or 3 years. He's known as like a hands-on guy. Like he tore his Achilles going through running back drills with his players a few years back. So he's like that kind of coach where like he'll inspire his guys like hoop hurrah, like let's go. But as far as like proven coaching situational play calling tendencies go, I don't know if we can expect a whole lot. So while I expect this offense to improve like for the rest of the season, it takes a lot to install a new offense in 3 days, which is effectively what he's working with. And then, like LaFleur and the Packers just want to manage game environments. So there's not a ton of upside there.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. Ryan, do you have anything to add on this game before we move on here?
Not really. Yeah, it's just neither offense is really concentrated enough around anybody to be worth getting excited over in as you said, a low total game. So yeah, nothing that super jumps out.
Yeah, I mean, maybe you could make an argument for Swift plus the Bears defense. Even that seems pretty thin to me. So let's just move on to the Minnesota Vikings at the Tennessee Titans. Minnesota favored by 6 points here. Total is 39.5. Another pretty gross one, although there are some individual plays we can be a bit more excited about. Only injury note, Aaron Jones has no injury designation. He is good to go. L'Jarius Sneed out again for the Titans. Hilo, I'll have you start here. What are your thoughts on Aaron Jones? I believe Scott Barrett and Ryan in the Everything Report this week noted that they were curious, after a second injury scare, got carted to the locker room with a rib injury, ended up coming back. Are they going to dial back Aaron Jones' workload a bit going forward? I think the problem is that, the backup running backs here just haven't been great. So what are your thoughts on the Vikings side and this game in general?
So there's two things there. One, like they've shown some interest in getting Cam Akers more work after he came over to the team. So, and two is with a bet like Aaron Jones, what do you win if you're right? I mean, this is a guy who has gone over 3x his salary multiplier only once all season. So even if like you catch lightning in a bottle, what is the true upside of a guy like Aaron Jones? Probably not worth the risk. And the risk is that the Vikings just completely own this game with their defense, which is probably the most interesting GPP play to me from this game is the Vikings defense. And like they're high priced, so people don't play them because like playing high priced defense is taboo now. So that just makes me want to play them even more.
Yeah, I'm right there with you. We are actually way above industry on the Vikings defense, and I think they're a pretty exciting GPP play. I mean, a hyper-aggressive defense against a quarterback that has just been so prone to turnovers is always very tempting. Ryan, anything that you're interested in on the Vikings side, and what are your thoughts on Calvin Ridley? Because he's pretty clearly the only Titans play people will gravitate towards this week.
Yeah, I don't feel too strongly about any of the Vikings. Obviously, the Titans have been pretty good against opposing wide receivers, the fewest schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed to the position. And Jones' workload has just been worse recently, hasn't gone above a 12% target share in any game since week 4. With Addison and Hawkinson back, again, this offense is just not as condensed as it used to be. So nothing really there. I do have some interest in Ridley, especially if the ownership isn't going to get out of control, which it looks like it might not. Over his past 3 games without DeAndre Hopkins, he's averaging a 34% target share and 100 receiving yards, 20.4 fantasy points per game. Yeah, it's kind of nuts. Like, he's just getting funneled all of this volume. On paper, it's a good matchup. Vikings are top 5 to opposing wide receivers. I have like some nitpicky schematic concerns with all the too high they run, and them being likely to get a lot of pressure here in this game too. But yeah, I don't know. I think Ridley's a pretty decent play if you're trying to bring down the ownership of your lineup.
Yeah, certainly going to be a lot of volatility with the Ridley play, but I do think there is some potential juice there. Also, one of the few scenarios where I'd be totally fine playing Ridley with the Vikings defense. We could pretty easily see Will Levis just completely explode, and Ridley could still hit the bonus or grab you a touchdown. Hilo, do you have anything else on Ridley here before we move on?
No, I think Ryan covered the bulk of it. Poor schematic matchup, and we don't expect. I mean, the Vikings are leading the league in blitz rate, and they're hitting home with those blitzes, and we know that they're playing a ton of too high behind those blitzes. So it's just not a great schematic matchup either way. But he obviously can get there.
Yep. Yeah, good shouts, guys. All right, a slightly more interesting game next up here. We have the Jacksonville Jaguars at the Detroit Lions. Jacksonville's a 13.5-point underdog. Total here is 47. Major injury note, Sam Laporta is out with his AC joint sprain. Tank Bigsby also out with an ankle injury. Hilo, it makes sense to want to play the Lions in this spot. I mean, their implied point total is, just a hair over 30. Only problem is the offense has been ridiculously spread out, and we can't really expect Jacksonville to push here. Do you have any interest in the Lions side? I think particularly people are pretty interested in the running backs.
Yeah, that last statement is the key here because Trevor Lawrence is also out. So like Mac Jones, like who has what now? He didn't throw a touchdown. So he has like 36 career touchdowns versus 26 career interceptions. It's like we can't really expect and already playing for a Jaguars team that's struggling to move the football and in the red zone. So I don't have a lot of hope for the Jaguars to move the football. And if the Jaguars are not moving football, we've seen Jared Goff has 2 games all season over like 25 pass attempts. It's insane. With a season low of 15 pass attempts. So like, yeah, Amon-Ra has scored in 7 straight games. That's fantastic. He's also he's seen 1 double-digit target game in that stretch. So the one guy, and I'll say like in earnest, the one guy that I like from the Lions, and it's very weird to say like I've almost crossed off the Lions when they have a Vegas implied team total of 30 points. But the one guy I like on the Lions is the guy who can do the damage on minimal work, and that is Jameson Williams. If you're looking for, and this slate doesn't have a lot of certainty as far as like projections are concerned. So we're looking to embrace a little bit more variance if that's the case. And on a guy like Jameson Williams, where we know he can go for, 120 and 2 on 6 targets, those are the bets that I'm looking to take this week. So yeah, I mean, maybe some Brock Wright, but there's other like value tight end options. So like, yeah, just like Jameson Williams, really.
Yeah, I think that's a really good call. He was written down as one of my one of the more interesting GPP angles that I had, and it doesn't look like he's going to pull any ownership here. The matchup is obviously awesome. Ryan, what are your thoughts on Jameson? Rest of this Detroit Lions offense here.
So I kind of originally wanted to write up Jameson as like an ideal schematic matchup with the Jaguars playing man coverage. They haven't done that nearly as much recently. They've only gone above 24% man coverage. Or they haven't gone above 24% in either of their last 2 games. They're just playing a lot more too high. So I don't know. Like I certainly get it with Jameson. The running backs are interesting to me. I feel like with them, you're just kind of hoping you pick the one that is going to score multiple touchdowns. That's kind of the issue with every running back on this slate is I feel like a running back to beat the very strong like Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane and Alvin Kamara needs to score multiple times. And while obviously either of the Lions guys could do it, there's just other bets I'd rather make there. So yeah, nothing super popping to me with the Lions. I'm kind of probably mostly staying away from this side of the game.
Yeah, it's really tough. I mean, we were talking about this with projections. Just very difficult to lean into either running back when they're relatively expensive. They're splitting backfield XFP. Jahmyr Gibbs is playing way better. He's at almost 7 yards per carry over his last 3 or 4 games. But David Montgomery's stealing all the inside the 10 work. He's at about 85% of inside the 10 carries, inside the 10 XFP over the last 3 or 4 games. So yeah, it's just a really, really tricky situation. I wouldn't be surprised if they turned a bit more toward Gibbs inside the 10, but like I said, based on recent trends, it's been Montgomery. So I do think there are just better spots to target at the running back position. On the Jacksonville side of this game, I mean, it's really straightforward. It's basically just Evan Ingram. Ryan, I know you had some great schematic notes on Ingram. I think the main thing that stands out is that in his 7 games without Christian Kirk since the start of last season, Ingram averages 10 targets per game, 16.5 fantasy points per game, 86% route share, 27% target share. Those are all right there as, overall tight end 1 over the full season. Lions have also been particularly weak against the slot, which is where Ingram runs 45% of his routes. Ryan, anything to add on Evan Ingram here?
Yeah, as you said, they're a really big slot funnel, have allowed the most schedule adjusted to the slot, the highest target share to the slot. Also, the Lions generally lean more man-heavy, and Ingram is one of the only tight ends in the league that has actually been a bit better against man coverage. It's relatively small sample, but this year he has a 37% target per route run rate against man. That would rank top 6 among all wide receivers. So yeah, I mean, I can say it in 15 different ways. The volume should be incredible for Evan Ingram. Obviously, you worry about the efficiency with this offense. But I think he's a decent play. Not projecting for like a crazy amount of ownership. I really don't mind just chasing the XFP here.
Yeah, there are a lot of solid tight end plays on the slate, and Ingram is certainly one of them. All right, let's move on to a game that is actually
real
very
quick
exciting.
Before we move on. I just want to note on that Evan Ingram is one of those players that it's like, what do you win if you're right on him? If you're right, he sees double-digit targets from Mac Jones. How does that compare to like salary adjusted versus a guy like Travis Kelce, who has seen double-digit looks in 4 out of 5 games from Patrick Mahomes? It's hard for me to want to click a guy like Evan Ingram, where his median projection or median production profile is probably in something like 6-7 catches for 50 to 70 yards. So it's hard for him to put the slate out of reach. Like, it's hard for him to put up a score where you couldn't make up somewhere else. And at that salary, you're kind of saying, I'm targeting this guy because he's going to put the slate out of reach. So for me, it's a really, really difficult click when you just compare like the state of the tight end position on this slate. I just thought that's worth noting here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I mean, obviously 10 or 12 targets from Mac Jones, just not worth nearly as much as 10 or 12 targets from a guy like Mahomes. Ingram's still a guy who's going to make my pool, but I'm with you, Hilo. Doubt he'll be my highest owned tight end this week. The volume should just be so good, though. All right, moving on to a much more fun game. We have the Baltimore Ravens at the Pittsburgh Steelers. Baltimore's favored by 3.5. Total is 48.5. Couple injury notes here. Isaiah Likely practiced in full all week. He will play. On the Pittsburgh side, Jalen Warren popped up on the injury report on Thursday with a back injury. He ended up logging limited sessions on both Thursday and Friday. He's officially questionable. Ryan, I know that you really like Zay Flowers here. The matchup is really, really strong, and so is the volume. He profiles, just overall, you look at his game logs as a really strong GPP play. I mean, he's posted a bunch of tournament winning scores and, also a handful of scores in the single digits. Why don't you give me your thoughts on Flowers, then we can talk the rest of the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, as you said, he's kind of an ideal, like, volatile GPP play type of guy. Schematically, this is probably the best spot or the most exciting spot on the slate for me. So the Steelers play easily the most single high in the league, and Flowers has been more than twice as efficient against single high than two high over his career. Top 4 in yards per route run against single high this season, like up with the Justin Jeffersons and the Nico Collins. So that's great. And then he is very likely to avoid Joey Porter the majority of the time in this game. In week 9, they were kind of moving him around the formation, putting him into the slot a lot. 53% slot rate in week 9 against the Broncos and Pats can. So I just like how the Ravens have kind of approached getting Flowers his looks this season. And I think it just very easily and clearly translates to this matchup as well. So he's someone I'm going to have a lot of.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I was a bit surprised to see ownership coming in. I mean, it was a bit lower earlier in the week, but even right now, 5-8% generally around the industry on Flowers. I certainly like that number quite a bit. Lamar Jackson isn't projecting well. I mean, you look at any projection source, Lamar isn't really gonna pop for you, and for that reason, he isn't pulling much ownership. This is also a guy who's on pace for a top 10 fantasy quarterback season of all time. He's leading the NFL in basically every passing stat, on top of being the greatest rushing quarterback of all time. I mean, I think it's pretty easy to justify a Lamar Jackson, Zay Flowers stack in GPPs this week. And you could say similar stuff about Derrick Henry, who, sure, his median projection isn't anywhere close to that of Christian McCaffrey or Alvin Kamara, but the upside is arguably similar. He does average 23 fantasy points per game in wins. Hilo, I'm curious if you have anything to add on the Baltimore side of this game and how you're viewing this game overall. Any love for the Steelers?
Yeah, dude. Looking at this game, if you look at just what what the Ravens have been a part of in their games this season, they are combining for just under 810 yards of offense from scrimmage per game. That is insane. They are combining for 57 points, just over 57 points per game, averaging. This is a team that we should be super stoked to be targeting whenever they take the field. They just have happened to be off the main slate a bunch this season. We haven't had the chance to, but go back 4 weeks ago when they played the Bengals, 5 weeks ago, whenever it was. This team is breeding excellent game environments. So when you add all that into Zay Flowers has an unbelievable schematic matchup. Ryan nailed the talking points there. I won't belabor those. But then you look at the ownership, it's dude, Lamar Jackson, 2%. What are we doing? Because when you consider the state of this slate, there's one quarterback that can put up a score that you were not winning without this week. It's Lamar Jackson. Save the discussions on Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes. There's one quarterback who can put up 40 points at a meaningful frequency on the slate. It's Lamar Jackson. So when you get a slate like that, you have to have some interest in the one player that can do that. So what is the frequency that Lamar Jackson would score 35 fantasy points in this game if we played out the slate 100 times? Well, he's done it in 3 of 9 games thus far. So if we just make the math just simple as possible, if he's going to hit 35 fantasy points at a 33.3% frequency and his ownership is 2%, this is probably the greatest single source leverage point on the slate, just by the numbers. So now you consider the field's not going to be playing Lamar. The field's not going to be playing Zay Flowers. The field's not going to be playing them together. The field's definitely not going to be playing both of them with Derrick Henry, because that's a no-no. We don't play a non-pass catching running back with this quarterback, God forbid. But if the Ravens are scoring 42 points and there's 6 or 7 touchdowns from this offense, it doesn't matter, dude. I want those raw points in my roster. So I am extremely interested in Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, playing them all together, bringing it back with George Pickens, who we'll talk about here in a minute. But you're talking about a lot of salary, so we're going to need some value to be able to do that. But the field isn't doing that, and this has a very similar feel to the Cincinnati Bengals and the Baltimore Ravens from 4 or 5 weeks ago, in that this is the clearest spot for the game environment to turn into something that you had to have a piece of. And if it takes off, it's probably going to take off pretty hard.
Yeah, I am right there with you. And I think the Steelers side is pretty straightforward, which also makes these Baltimore Ravens stacks even more tempting. I mean, the matchup is just incredible for George Pickens. Ravens allow a league high plus 8.9 schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to opposing wide receivers, and a league high 32.5 fantasy points per game to opposing wide receiver ones over their last 6 games. That's 37% higher than the next closest team. We know we have Russell Wilson playing quarterback, who leads the NFL in deep passing yards per game. This is just such an awesome spot for Pickens. Ryan, I'll throw it over to you. Anything to add on George Pickens, and where are you at on Russell Wilson, who I think is a little bit interesting? He's actually the QB4 on this slate by DraftKings fantasy points per game. Not really my favorite play, but a guy I do have some interest in.
I do think I'm more interested in playing Lamar than I am Wilson, just kind of for all the reasons Hilo laid out. But yeah, no, certainly this is a perfect skill set match for him. The Ravens have been so vulnerable deep, allowed the 5th highest deep throw rate. Yeah, this is perfect. And specifically, it's perfect for Pickens. Yeah, I think my kind of default build is going to be Pickens as the bring back. But he's top 5 in air yard share. Has seen a 20% boost to his catchable air yards since Wilson took over. Leads the league in deep receptions this year. 2nd most deep receiving yards per game. Yeah, and he's also been playing like out of his mind. He's top 6 in all the per route stats and yards per route run and first read target share. I'm just really excited for Pickens. I'm excited for this game. I do think if you play Pickens, you should be stacking at least one other piece from this game, just because, as we know, the Steelers, if they can go run heavy, they will. So if you're playing him, you may as well say, okay, I'm already making the bet on the game environment, may as well take advantage of it elsewhere. So not really a one-off to me, but I want to stack this game a lot, so I'll probably end up with a lot of him overall.
Yeah, really love that call. Brett Whitefield in the chat, our lead data charter, also noted Ravens have allowed 82 pass plays over 15 yards. That's 21 more than the next closest team. Just absolutely absurd. Hilo, anything to add on the Steelers side, George Pickens, before we move on from this game?
Yeah, there's also 2 key defensive injuries that we didn't talk about earlier from this game. Alex Highsmith is going to be out for the Steelers, and their pressure rate almost gets cut in half with him off the field. They need somebody opposite JJ to be doing some, or sorry, TJ, to be doing some damage. Without that, they can just roll a tight end to help Chip. They can do some double teams on TJ and make his life a little bit harder. So, and then on the other side, Kyle Hamilton, obviously we saw what happened this past week on Thursday. Thursday they play? I forget. When Kyle Hamilton left the game, Dude, I even forget who they played now, dude. It's been a long day. Who did they play this last week? And when was it? Was it Thursday?
Yeah, that was a Thursday game. I'm also struggling to remember who they played. Did
Sorry,
the game even
derailing? Derailing the show.
It was the Bengals. It was the Bengals. That's right.
Oh, okay. That was the second Bengals meeting. That's right. So we saw what Jamar Chase did to them after Kyle Hamilton left the game. Anyway, so like those are 2 key injuries for both defenses. That could open up some stuff as well. So yeah, just like everything kind of adds up to me that this is like probably one of the top in game and potential game environments on the season. Really, we know like the Steelers, we know how they want to attack, but they have shown the propensity and the ability. Like if they are getting pushed, they will open it up, and so that brings me right back to George Pickens.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. Just adds even more juice to an already juicy game environment. All right, let's move on to the Indianapolis Colts at the New York Jets. Colts are 4-point underdogs. Total here is 43.5. Couple injury notes. Michael Pittman practiced in full. He will return from the back injury that held him out of Week 10. Devontae Adams is sick. He's also dealing with a wrist issue. Apparently the illness happened earlier in the week. He's expected to play, but certainly worth keeping an eye on. Hilo, Anthony Richardson is 5,300. We know the upside is just absurd. He scored 27.1 DraftKings points in just 45 plays in Week 1. He's gone at least 5x his current DraftKings salary in 29% of the 7 games where he's thrown over 15 pass attempts. I certainly have some interest here, but I am a bit concerned about the game environment. What are your thoughts on Anthony Richardson in GPPs this week? Oh, he's muted.
Hey.
Got it. Really like the play. And I think I could talk a lot about this situation. I don't want to talk too long, be too heavy-winded, but I'll try and make it concise as possible. There is a potential outcome for Shane Steichen, who is probably one of the better game planners and one of the better offensive minds to be able to look at what he has available to him and maximize an offensive game plan to suit that. We didn't necessarily see that early in the season with Anthony Richardson. I think that was a lot to do with them trying to develop him as a pocket passer. Because, like, pick your poison. Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, these mobile guys, Lamar Jackson, you have to also, like, be able to throw a freaking football and complete a pass greater than 44% of the time, right? So I think that's what they were doing earlier in the season. They said, okay, we built this offense to do this, It's not working. Let's go to Joe Flacco. And then they realized, like, and I think that came from ownership. I don't think that was Shane Steichen. But anyway, I think now there is an opportunity for them to say, like, we're in oh shit realm. We have to now, we're highly unlikely to make the playoffs. We have to win out. But even then, like, we're in evaluation mode. We're in what do we have to build around for the future? And if that's the case, I think it's at least possible that we see the training wheels come off of Anthony Richardson, because he had a like 7% scramble rate when pressured over his starts earlier in the season. Like, that is not what we saw last year. And that's like, we want him to unlock that upside and just be like, go play street ball and like, go do your thing, dude. I think it's at least possible that we see Steichen say, you know what, let's see what we got here. Let's evaluate for the future. And if this guy is something that we can build around, like, we need to unleash the stallion and not try and confine him to pony ball. So I think it's at least possible that we see this offense open up this week. So I'm interested in Anthony Richardson. His short to intermediate struggles are still there. So I have less interest in Josh Downs, in Michael Pittman. So I think you can play him naked, or you could add in Alec Pierce for those downfield looks. I mean, Alec Pierce is leading the league in average depth of target. He's seeing tons of downfield stuff. So I think if you're just trying to catch the lightning and the what ifs here, it makes a compelling case for the upside.
Yeah. I mean, we know the upside is there, and at a price of 5,300, I mean, for a guy with Richardson's profile, it does feel really good. Ryan, I think in our projections meeting this morning, you had a crazy stat that Richardson is throwing deep 29% of the time against single high, and the Jets have had a bit of a lean toward single high. Anything to add on Richardson, this matchup for him, and then do you like anybody on the Jets side of this game?
Yeah, no, I mean, Hilo completely nailed it. I really like Richardson as kind of a GPP play. I do think Pierce is the only one it makes any real sense to play him with. And yeah, as you said, he's thrown deep 30% of the time against single high this season. The Jets have been a bit of a deep funnel. They're top 10 in deep receiving yards per game allowed. Have allowed the most schedule adjusted to QBs on the ground over the past 5 weeks. A lot of that is going to be getting cooked by Kyler Murray last week. So yeah, really like the play with Richardson. On the Jets side, I have some interest in both of the receivers. I mean, it's just such a condensed offense. The volume is so good. Garrett Wilson leads all wide receivers in XFP since week 5. Adams just got insane volume last week. I don't know, the Colts third most yards per game downfield, third most to the outside. So you can kind of tell yourself a story there, but I don't know. I told myself the exact same story last week is kind of my issue. And the offense just looked so bad. So I don't know. Like, I think in Richardson lineups, like a Garrett Wilson as a bring back is fine, but I don't think I'm prioritizing any of the Jets as one-off plays this week.
Yeah, I'm with you. I still have some interest in Garrett Wilson. I mean, like you said, the workload has just been so damn good since week 5. 3 more targets than the next closest player. It is a fringe top 10 matchup. But I mean, we know Adams has the BFF connection, almost a 40% target share last week, despite the fact that he just isn't playing very well. 14th worst of 90 qualifying receivers in separation win rate, 4th worst in fantasy points over expectation. Hilo, anything to add on these Jets wide receivers, and what are your thoughts on Breece Hall in a relatively loaded running back slate?
Yeah, man, and Devontae Adams is like dropping footballs, which is like we never see
the
that,
community.
Dude.
They really haven't been on the same page, which is weird because they've played together so much.
Yeah, so all of the things that Ryan brought up about Garrett Wilson make him probably, like, if we just look at range of outcomes, expected fantasy points versus salary, it probably makes him one of the most fundamentally underpriced players on this slate. So that doesn't necessarily like guarantee fantasy production, but what it does is if you start stacking these guys that are fundamentally underpriced, like Puka Nacua is probably one, Devon Achane is probably one, Garrett Wilson is probably one, Cedric Tillman is probably one. If you start like stacking these guys in a roster, you increase your effective salary in doing so. Like if a player is 2K underpriced, you stack up 3 of those dudes, and it's not going to happen every week, but we just so happen to have like 4 or 5 of these guys this week where it's like you stack these guys up, you're playing with an effective salary of 55, 56K on DraftKings instead of 50K, which everyone else is confined to. So that's at least an interesting way to start accessing value. Where like we hear the word value around the industry and the bells go off in our head. We're just like, oh, that means like a player priced below 5K that projects well. It's like, no, that's not really like what value is. I want to divorce like this thinking of the word value into where it's like should be thought of as a player that's priced too low for his range of outcomes. Like that's fundamentally what it is. In that definition, Garrett Wilson is probably the most fundamentally underpriced player on the slate.
Yeah, totally think that's fair. Really like that call. And I mean, we saw him, he was mega chalk last week. I don't think the fundamentals of the play have really changed at all. And yeah, he's just not going to be that popular this week. We do need to talk Breece Hall. Hall's a bit of a tough play to assess, third in snap share, seventh in expected fantasy points per game over the full season. Jets are 4-point favorites, and in wins, Hall ranks behind only Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry in fantasy points per game dating back to 2022. The problem is his pass game involvement is down a bit since Devontae Adams joined the team. And his carry share has been a bit all over the place. I feel a lot more secure in the more chalky options, high-low, but I think the other tough thing is that Hall's still going to pull some ownership. If he was in that 8 to 10% range, I'd probably be a bit more interested. I'd expect him to come in a bit closer to 15%, which is what we have now. So yeah, I'm curious on your thoughts on Breece Hall before we move on.
Yeah, and the Jets rank 5th worst in yards created before contact. And we have seen one game since week 4, fact check me, with DeForest Buckner and like the big trio in Indy being healthy together. So there's a lot of things kind of like that are going on behind the scenes that lead me away from Breece Hall. The uncertainty with the workload, it's been kind of ebb and flow. And then these kind of other considerations that I don't think the field is going to be thinking about, but it looks like he's not going to garner a ton of ownership. So I don't know. Very clearly lagging behind those other top plays at running back on paper, at least. Once first kick happens, that doesn't really mean much, but I won't have a lot of Breece this week, I don't think.
Yeah, I think I'm going to end up in a pretty similar spot. All right, we can move on to a game that, might be a little sneaky this week. Los Angeles Rams at the New England Patriots. Rams are favored by 4.5. Total here, 43.5. No injuries to really note. Ryan, I'll throw it over to you. It's a bit shocking to see, Drake May's pulling moderate ownership right now in projections, but Kayshon Boutte looks like he's going to be pretty chalky this week. What are your thoughts on the New England side of this game? Obviously had to ask you, given the Patriots Josh Gordon jersey in your background.
Of course. Yeah, no, I really like this game. I think this can be a sneaky shootout. So in games with Drake May, the Patriots have a top 3 pass rate over expectation this season. The Rams in their games with both Puka and Cooper Kupp would rank top 2 in pass rate over expectation. I think this is a game environment that could kind of shoot off. And if it does, yeah, I'm most interested in playing May. A big reason for that is I expect the Rams to be able to get a lot of pressure. In the fantasy points data suite, we've got our line matchups tool. The Patriots have the 3rd worst pressure grade this week, right? So that's actually good for May, though, because he has a freaking 30% scramble rate on plays that he's pressured. So yeah, that's great. I think you can play May naked just because that's kind of the thesis of it. If you do want to stack him, I was more interested in stacking him before I saw what the projected ownership coming in was on a Kayshon Boutte. Like it's totally fine. You can definitely make the case where, yeah, the Rams have been more of a perimeter funnel. They're top 5 in yards per game allowed on the deep ball. That's Boutte's game. I mean, he has seen a surprisingly decent amount of volume over the past 3 weeks. Nearly 13 expected fantasy points per game over his last 3. And he obviously is priced very attractively. But yeah, it's just really hard for me to want to play that when I mean, he hasn't really done a lot with that volume for starters. So it's like, yeah, it feels really bad to me to play Boutte with him. If you're stacking May, I think Hunter Henry's a little more interesting. Still going to be some ownership on him. But his red zone usage and his ceiling has been pretty good. He's one of only 6 tight ends on this slate that have gone over 16 DraftKings points 6 or more times since the start of last season. He's the only one priced under 4K of that group. And across Drake May's full games, he has a 33% target share in the red zone, which would be top 5 among all wide receivers this year. So yeah, I think if you're stacking May, it's with Henry for me. But yeah, you can certainly play him naked, or you can just play multiple Rams bringbacks. I think works as well.
Yeah, I think that is a shout that makes a ton of sense. Certainly lean toward Henry there as the stacking partner. Ramondre Stevenson also deserves at least a little bit of love. RB8 by expected fantasy points, RB8 by snap share, RB11 by fantasy points per game over his last 3. That suggests solid value relative to his RB20 DraftKings price tag. Most of the strong running back plays on this slate are, 7K and higher. So I believe he's 6,100. Yeah, that's, it's decent. Projected negative game script is worth about a 15% hit to his production. He does profile as a decent value. High-low, anything to add on the New England side of this game? How are you seeing this game overall?
Yeah, there's been the Patriots have been blown out in 3 of their games. In the other 6 games, Ramondre Stevenson is averaging 19.23 DK points per game on 21.5 running back opportunities per game. So that is robust and healthy. It just becomes a question of, do the Rams run away from this or run away with this? I think the answer is most likely no. With Drake May, with Sean McVay's coaching tendencies, he's typically looking to adjust and outmaneuver opponents, not throw 21 points in the first quarter. So Ramondre is at least interesting. And I did this last weekend and played Drake May with Ramondre Stevenson and Demario Douglas. I would alter that this week and say Drake May plus Ramondre plus, hold your food down, Kendrick Bourne. Kendrick Bourne was active but did not see an offensive snap last week. But we have a quote from Gerard Mayo that said, it ended with, he's a very good player, we just have to get him going. And he called the fact that he didn't see any offensive snaps last week a wake-up call. So there might have been something going on behind the scenes, because like KJ Osborne, Jalen Polk are not it. And I think that is very clear. So I would expect Kendrick Bourne to return. And Gerard Mayo said that he's going to play this week. I would expect him to return to 75% of the offensive snaps. The last time he was healthy in the league was in 2022. He had a 10.1 ADOT in that season. So this is a guy that is working downfield. This is a guy that can put up counting stats in a hurry. So I actually like just saying, you guys have fun with Kayshon Boutte and taking a shot on Kendrick Bourne here.
Yeah, that is a really interesting contrarian way to play it. I mean, we did see the New England coaches come in before week 10 and say, we want to get the young guys going. I think that probably did play a role in Kendrick Bourne not playing a snap last week. But I mean, I'm right there with you. I think he pretty clearly is their second most talented wide receiver after Demario Douglas. So wouldn't be shocked if they got him involved. It's just, I mean, it's basically impossible to project right now. You won't see any site that has him higher than, 2 or so points. So you really got to force him up if you're using an opto or, obviously hand building it is. It's a tougher click, but I can see it. I think that's an interesting shout for sure. On the Rams side of this game, it's pretty straightforward for me. I think I'm mostly just looking at Kyren Williams and Puka Nacua. Nacua specifically in his 2 games with Cooper Kupp, 2 full games with Cooper Kupp, he's had a clear advantage. He's commanded a 42% first read target share and 20.7 expected fantasy points per game. Those would both rank top 2 among wide receivers over the full season. Cooper Kupp only had a 26% first read target share, 16 expected fantasy points per game. So the usage is pretty clearly skewed toward Nacua. Ryan, I'm curious if you have any take on that, on the matchup here for Nacua, and any love for Kyren Williams in a slate where, he's obviously going to go a bit overlooked given the strength that we have between McCaffrey, Kamara, Devon Achane.
Yeah, I'm with you on preferring Nacua. As you laid out, the volume's just been better when he's been on the field, and Kupp's has been notably worse. Also a little bit worried about Kupp against man coverage. He's about 37% less efficient against man. The Patriots run quite a bit of that. So yeah, Puka is my clear lean. And I do like Kyren quite a bit as well. Patriots have allowed the second most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to opposing running backs on the ground. It's a solid schematic matchup as well. Pats are top 5 in yards per carry allowed to opposing man gap concept runs, which is a decent chunk of what Williams does. So yeah, I really like going Kyren and Puka, and that's how we just say that's how the Rams are kind of concentrated, and bringing it back with May there. So that, yeah, May is likely beating Stafford in that scenario. That's kind of going to be my default way of playing the game.
Yeah, I think I'm going to play it pretty similarly. My favorite way to play Kyren is, if I end up on a lineup that I think is just a bit too chalky, that does have a Kamara or a CMC, it's pretty easy to get off to Kyren at, 20, 15% lower ownership. I think that's how I want to play it. Hilo, anything to add on the Rams side before we move on?
No, yeah, Puka's a boss, man. His usage and how he's being schemed in this offense, he is the clear alpha. And talking about like players that are fundamentally priced, I mentioned him earlier. He's probably one of the most fundamentally underpriced players on the slate.
Yeah, can't help but agree with that. All right, let's move on to the Las Vegas Raiders at the Miami Dolphins. Raiders are 7-point underdogs. Total here is 44. No major injuries of note. We got to start with Devon Achane here. Averages 19.5 expected fantasy points per game, 24 actual fantasy points per game in his games with Tua Tagovailoa. Obviously only priced at 7,300, draws a top 4 schedule adjusted matchup as a 7.5 point favorite. He leads all running backs in fantasy points per snap while the Dolphins are leading, dating back to 2022. That's worth a 65% boost compared to when the Dolphins are trailing or tied. Raiders are also a massive underneath funnel, allowing the 7th most receiving yards per game on throws traveling 10 or fewer yards downfield, but the 2nd fewest on the deep ball. And that sort of segues a bit into Tyreek Hill, who, only an 18% target share since Tua came back in action. Hilo, the matchup isn't really screaming play Tyreek Hill here, but Tyreek Hill at 7,400 projecting for 5% ownership around the industry. I mean, you have to have some interest in GPPs, right?
Yeah, I think you have to. He's going to project much worse than Puka and Garrett Wilson, which is a tough click because they're priced in the same range. And if I'm playing Tyreek Hill, I would almost want to do it in doubles with Tua and Devon Achane, and just say like the Dolphins finally score 5 touchdowns. Like, please do it. Yeah, so that's kind of I wouldn't play Tyreek Hill outside of like a game environment bet or a team stacks here.
Yeah, I think that's certainly fair. I mean, a little interesting as a one-off, but I would lean toward what you said is mostly a game environment bet. Only other Dolphin that I wanted to note here was Jonnu Smith leads the Dolphins in targets and receiving yards since week 5, which seems almost impossible, but it's true. Draws a top 5 matchup, strong value against a Raiders team that, like I mentioned earlier, funnels volume underneath. Ryan, on the Raiders side, it's pretty much just Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. Jacoby Myers projecting quite well. What are your thoughts on those two plays?
Yeah, so I mean, Bowers' volume has just come down so much since Jacoby Myers has come back. Just an 18% target share and just over 9 expected fantasy points per game. I remember a month ago kind of writing out this case in the Everything report where, yeah, Bowers is seeing incredible volume, but almost none of it is coming in the end zone, right? Very, very few scoring opportunities in this Raiders offense. And that's what's really biting him now. So yeah, Bowers isn't someone I really have interest in GPPs. Myers, I think, is fine. Just 5,600 is way too cheap for the type of volume he's seeing. But again, like when you factor in projected ownership, is Jacoby Myers like the type of wide receiver that's going to completely bury you? I don't know that he totally strikes fear into my heart. So yeah, I think Myers is a fine play, but not somebody I'm going out of my way to target.
Yeah, and I mean, we have to keep in mind that these Gardner Minshew targets might not be great for Myers, even though the volume certainly should be. Bowers, I mean, you could make an argument on talent alone, but, in the same price range, we have Travis Kelce and George Kittle, who I think are probably offer more upside, and at least, especially with Kelce locked into a significantly better role at this point. Hilo, anything to add on the Raiders guys? Hilo?
I was muted. Sorry, I said nope.
Oh, all right. Gotcha. Easy enough. All right. We can move on to another game that could be a potential sneaky shootout. Cleveland Browns at the New Orleans Saints. Cleveland is a 1-point favorite. Total here is 44. Only injury of note is that Jamal Williams is yet again out. Jameis Winston. I mean, Hilo, a couple weeks ago, you mentioned that it's not Jameis Winston week. It's Jameis Winston season. Do you still feel that way headed into a matchup with the Saints?
Yeah, I do. I mean, looking what this team has been forced to do. Nick Chubb is back. He's not playing a full role, which makes sense. He's averaging 3.5 yards per carry. But this offensive line is like healthier than they've been all season now. So it's like there's kind of two pulling factors here. One is like Jameis Winston has pass attempts of 46 and 41 in his 2 full starts. The other is the offensive line piece, where like this is the first time all season where this offensive line has had all 5 starters on the field together. And I don't know, did Jedrick Wills make it? He did make it off the injury report. Did Conklin? I'm going to check that real quick. Conklin was on the injury report as well. But anyway, I would expect, based on what we've seen from this coaching staff, they're both kind of, we have a head coach that kind of wants to lean a little bit more run heavy, but we have an offensive coordinator that has proven he wants to be near the league and pass rate over expectations. So with Jameis now, I would expect like 40 pass attempts is like a weekly baseline. So if that's the case, before like his pass catchers take off in salary, because it's coming, it just makes so much sense to just stack up Jameis with doubles. You can do, I would prefer, like I have these pass catchers ranked: Cedric Tillman, Jerry Jeudy, Elijah Moore, and then David Njoku, which that's not consensus. But I would prefer Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman as the players that are working downfield, as the players that can help Jameis, get propelled over 300 yards. And now you're just effectively saying, I'm betting on this offense passing a ton, and I'm betting on capturing the touchdowns through these 2 guys.
Yeah. I mean, I think you could reasonably justify any of Jameis's 4 pass catchers between Elijah Moore, Tillman, Jeudy, and Njoku. I'm going to be playing a lot of Jameis, so I'll be mixing and matching across the board. I also think you could justify triple stacks here. My one note on Jameis was that he's cleared 275 catchable air yards in both of his starts this season. Both of those games ranked top 12 in terms of total catchable air yards. And I mean, this is Jameis Winston we're dealing with. We know he's hyper aggressive. We know he's capable of these incredible performances. And we also know he's capable of 5 interceptions and, the worst quarterback game you've ever seen. Ryan, I'm curious if you have anything to add on the Browns side of this game before we talk Alvin Kamara and Taysom Hill.
I would just add, obviously, I'm totally with you guys on Jameis. Want to be stacking him up, mixing and matching all these pass catchers. I will say on Elijah Moore, the Saints have been very vulnerable to the slot, especially recently. Second most schedule adjusted to opposing slot receivers over the past 5 weeks. Third most yards per game to the slot over the full season. I agree that, as far as who is actually going to push this game environment, who's going to push the Browns to get like downfield, it's probably not Elijah Moore, but I think it's justifiable enough to mix him and Njoku in as well, especially with Njoku coming in at lower ownership compared to a Cedric Tillman or an Elijah Moore.
Yeah, definitely think that's a solid call. I mean, really, I don't think in GPPs you can go that wrong stacking up the Browns with these great pass catchers. Alvin Kamara, obviously a guy that we need to talk about, just projecting incredibly well. Earned an absurd 38% of team expected fantasy points over the last 2 weeks, averaging 24.7 XFP per game, 24.7 actual fantasy points per game, 25% target share, and a 78% snap share over that stretch. He's effectively a high-end wide receiver too, with his 25% target share, who's earning an additional 18 to 20 carries per game. It's a bottom 3 schedule adjusted matchup, but the volume is incredible. I also wanted to note that for some reason he's priced as the RB9 on FanDuel, which is just absolutely ridiculous. To me, though, he does feel just a bit weaker in terms of overall upside compared to guys like Achane and Christian McCaffrey. I do have some concern over Taysom Hill stealing the inside the 10 attempts, which I believe, he's led the team with 3 inside the 10 carries since returning from injury in week 8. Hilo, how are you playing Kamara on a slate where, obviously we have McCaffrey and Achane also just projecting incredibly well?
Yeah, all of those are completely valid points. The counterpoint to that is Alvin Kamara has not found the end zone in 4 consecutive games. So we don't expect this team to be highly efficient. I mean, their primary pass catchers now are Marquez Valdes-Scantling and Mason Tipton. So like this is not a team that's going to have a clear path to like 35 points on the scoreboard, 28 points on the scoreboard. What you're looking for. So the way I like to describe the Saints, and I caught some flack on this earlier on a show I did earlier today. We are not playing Saints players for volume. You are playing Saints players for explosive plays in an offense that still is looking to create those. So like Marquez Valdes-Scantling feels a little point chasey, but like him in this like now Demi Rashid Shaheed role is kind of what it suits his skill set and his archetype the best. So like he probably ended in the best possible matchup or spot for his like skill set. He only played like 48% of the offensive snaps last week. So take that for what it's worth. But like, we're not playing any player on the Saints for volume. You're playing them for the potential to score multiple touchdowns or for splash plays. So that is like Taysom Hill could score multiple touchdowns. Alvin Kamara could score multiple touchdowns. And Marquez Valdes-Scantling could be like a splash play player. Outside of that, like you're burning money really playing any other player on the Saints. So yeah, like Alvin Kamara, I would prefer, like I was playing him to begin the season when he was like 12% owned. Up here, like 25, 30%, man, it's a really, really difficult click because we can't count on anything else for him other than the volume. And if he's not scoring touchdowns, I mean, we saw what he's done. He put up 30 DK points without scoring a touchdown, but like it's you're shrinking the path to GPP goodness if you're saying like, oh, all he has to do is like catch 14 passes and oh yeah, we're good. Like, okay, he could do that. It's just a very, very fine needle to thread.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense in this game. I have come around slightly more than I anticipated to MVS. I'm still not super eager to play him. Ryan, I think you had a good, correct me if I'm wrong, I think you had a good matchup note on MVS.
Yeah, so the way I wrote it in advanced matchups is I am so upset that I have to write about how good MVS's matchup is because, as Hilo said, it feels point chasey. It feels like kind of a donkey play, but I do think there's something to it. So the Browns are top 2 in the league in single high. MVS since the start of last season, about twice as efficient against single high in both yards and fantasy points per out run. The Browns also have been a very big deep funnel this year, top 5 in yards per game allowed on the deep ball, bottom 10 in yards per game allowed within 10 yards of the line of scrimmage. So arguably that's another kind of minor dock to a Kamara who's going to be working underneath. So yeah, I mean, I see this team pretty similarly to Hilo, where I think Kamara I think McCaffrey and Achane kind of as the other 2 big 3 running backs on this slate are like some of the best chalk we've seen all season. Yeah, Kamara, I just can't get there. Only 52% of carries inside the 10 with Taysom Hill active this year. So yeah, if I'm fading a chalky running back, it is Kamara. And yeah, I don't know. Will I actually play MVS in any lineups? That remains to be seen. But yeah, I think there's way more of a case for it than there has any right to be.
Yep. Yeah, I think that's a good shout. And also, I mean, this note on inside the 10 usage with Kamara speaks to Taysom Hill, I think, being a pretty interesting contrarian tight end play. 59% route share last week, ranked behind only Alvin Kamara on the team. And that was a season high mark for Taysom. Again, leads the team with 3 inside the 10 carries since returning from injury in week 8. He's always live to throw a touchdown. At 4,500, I get that he's not projecting particularly well. It's really hard to push a guy like Taysom Hill up significantly in projections, but I do think that's an interesting angle. If you build a chalky lineup, you really like throwing a Taysom Hill in there to save on a bit of ownership at the tight end position is interesting.
He hit a 70-yard touchdown called back for a hold last week too.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, we like there is upside there. There's both big play upside and inside the 10 upside. Like I said, he could throw a touchdown. This is one of the most versatile roles of my lifetime, of probably the last 40 or 50 years of NFL football. It's just very rare to see a guy who's a backup running back, a starting tight end, and a slot wide receiver sort of all in one. Moving on to the 4 p.m. slate here. Kicking things off with the Seattle Seahawks at the San Francisco 49ers. Seahawks are 6.5 point underdogs. Total here is 48. A couple injury notes. Noah Fant is out. That's going to make AJ Barner pop as a solid tight end value. George Kittle is questionable with a hamstring injury. He's expected to play. I mean, the guy just plays through everything. Hilo, to me, this feels like another week where Geno Smith is projecting for fairly notable ownership. I'm seeing, 7, 8, 9% across the industry. It doesn't really feel like anyone wants to play Geno Smith. None of his receivers are projecting particularly well. I'd be pretty shocked if he came in higher than 4 or 5%. What are your thoughts on Geno, DK Metcalf, the Seattle side of this game?
Yeah, I'm not overly excited to play Geno, but I do have some significant interest in DK Metcalf. This is a guy that is the clear alpha in this offense, and he is cheapest he has been in quite some, I guess since week 3. But yeah, the schematic matchup is okay. If you're looking to attack the 49ers, you're typically looking to attack them deep, just because they have this kind of inside out zone base that filters things to the perimeter. Which is where DK Metcalf is working. He also has the deepest ADA of his career. He's averaging the most air yards for his career. So this is a spot where at only 6,500, I like playing DK Metcalf if I'm making a game environment bet. And I don't think you need either quarterback in that game environment bet, leading me to more of a mini correlation, like DK Metcalf plus Juwan Jennings or DK Metcalf plus CMC, something along those lines here.
Yeah, I did write up Geno Smith in the slate breakdown, far from a glowing review, but I thought the best argument for Smith was that he enables you to get to a guy like DK Metcalf, who's going to be, pretty minimally owned and obviously has the upside. Do overall just prefer DK as a one-off play here, not really in love with Geno. Kenneth Walker is at least a little bit interesting. 18.2 expected fantasy points per game, 21 actual fantasy points per game. If we exclude a week 8 game due to a blowout and a week 7 game due to Walker being pretty sick, over the full season, those numbers would rank 6th and 3rd best among running backs. Also a bit shocking. I know I've noted this in previous weeks. He's seeing better per snap usage when Seattle is trailing compared to when they're leading, which is something you never would have expected out of Kenny Walker, even just a year ago. Ryan, at 7K, I'm fairly interested here. What are your thoughts on Walker?
Yeah, I think he's fine. And as I was kind of saying, there's two running backs I really want to play on this slate that it is going to take a lot to talk me off of. Walker's one guy where I think I can be talked into it. And as you were saying, even just them being underdogs doesn't really worry me. Has more expected fantasy points per game in the Seahawks losses this season than in their wins, funnily enough, alluding to that per snap usage. So yeah, I think he's kind of fine, but no super strong feelings either way.
Yeah, it's not a play that I'm super excited about. I do find him fairly interesting. I imagine in a 150 set might come in at 10 or 15% ownership. All right. San Francisco's side of this game, obviously, Brock Purdy is projecting to be fairly chalky here, if I remember correctly. Just wanted to pull it up on my spreadsheet. Around 8 to 12%, it looks like, across the industry. And I mean, it makes sense. He averaged 0.66 fantasy points per dropback last year in the 14 games he played with Debo, George Kittle, and Christian McCaffrey. That would rank 2nd best this season behind only Lamar Jackson. It's a top 8 schedule adjusted matchup. Hilo, you mentioned earlier that you weren't particularly interested in the quarterbacks in this game. I'm curious what your angle is on Purdy and the rest of the 49ers here.
Yeah, CMC is he's back, baby. He's back.
Oh yeah.
Returned to 88% of the snaps. He saw all but 2 running back opportunities, all but 6 running back snaps. I was on him last week. It was like, oh man, at 10.
I was too, man.
10% ownership. Dude, come on, man. Now he's going to be amongst the highest owned players on the slate, but rightfully so. He is, you look at week 17 last season, he was priced at 9,700, priced at 8,300 on DraftKings now. A little bit different story on FanDuel, but like this is another one of those guys that is fundamentally underpriced relative to his role in this offense. And the 49ers they're not typically a question of will they succeed offensively. It's typically like who's going to succeed. And CMC, I think it starts with him. So if you are playing like CMC with Devon Achane, we need to do something throughout the rest of the roster to differentiate ourselves, because that's going to be very, very popular this week, but rightfully so.
Yeah. I think that makes a ton of sense. I mean, I think we've done a great job highlighting some of the spots that you can get different. But yeah, I would agree. That'll sort of be the default build. Everyone starts with a CMC and Achane, and then probably one of these cheaper quarterbacks. All right, we got to talk about some of these ancillary pieces for San Francisco. I guess not super ancillary because they're all posting huge fantasy scores. Deebo Samuel is a top 7 schedule adjusted matchup. I mean, I think it's easy to argue that he's too cheap. It's just a bit of a tricky spot to decipher. I think my favorite play pretty clearly here is Juwan Jennings. I'm just not exactly sure where the ownership's going to come down on him. 35% target share, which would lead the position across his 2 games without either Deebo Samuel or Brandon Ayuk. Also led the team in expected fantasy points last week. Ryan, what are your thoughts on Deebo, Juwan Jennings, George Kittle here before we move on?
Yeah, so I really prefer Jennings out of this group. I just recorded like a little mini video all about Juwan Jennings and kind of him as a bet going forward. But so essentially, Shanahan came out after the game last week and said, yeah, Jennings was in the Brandon Ayuk X role, and I thought he played great in it, and he's going to do that for the rest of the season. Yeah, that's exactly what we want to hear, because the usage was amazing, and Jennings has been hyper efficient this season. He's top 6 in yards per out run and first downs per out run. His average separation score stuff looks incredible. I believe top 5 in separation win rate. So yeah, the guy's just balling. It's a great on paper matchup. And yeah, he's priced too cheap for the type of usage he's seen in games without either Deebo or Ayuk. Kittle I like a bit as well. He also has a pretty good on paper matchup. Seahawks allowed 2nd most schedule adjusted to opposing inline tight ends. Kittle's run like 55% from inline this season. So yeah, I like each of these pieces. So yeah, probably going to be swapping them in. But yeah, I think I agree with high-low, where I just don't have as much interest in the quarterbacks for this game. So yeah, a lot of mini stacks most likely. And yeah, as pretty obvious, but yeah, a lot of McCaffrey. That's it's amazing chalk. I'm happy to play it.
Yep. Yeah. McCaffrey at, what is he? 8,200. I mean, yeah, what a play, man. We were happily paying 9,600 for him in week 17 of last season. All right, moving on. Atlanta Falcons at the Denver Broncos. Atlanta is a 2.5 point underdog. Total here is 44. Only real injury of note here was that Darnell Mooney popped up on the Thursday injury report due to an Achilles injury. He has no injury designation headed into this week's game, so he should be good. It was weird, though. Atlanta actually listed 2 other players as limited due to an Achilles injury. That's just something you really never see on the injury report. I'm not sure what kind of gamesmanship they were trying to pull off with that one, but Mooney's good to go. High-low, I don't really have a ton of interest in the Atlanta side of this game. Bijan Robinson feels a bit overpriced. Drake London is still a bit beat up, and he's projected to see a lot more Patrick Surtain than Darnell Mooney is. I think my favorite play is Mooney, but I'm curious what your thoughts are before we talk Denver.
Yeah, man, I bring it up every week. I'm going to have lower interest in the Falcons than the field is going to, just regardless of the matchup in the spot. Yeah, that's really it for the Falcons for me.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair on the Atlanta side. You know, if forced to choose somebody, Darnell Mooney's pretty clearly my favorite play on that side, but it's not a take I feel super strongly about. Denver side is fairly interesting. Bo Nix is projecting pretty well. I mean, he'll be moderately chalky. 7-8% is generally what I'm seeing across the industry. Scored at least 21.7 DraftKings points in 3 of his last 6 games. He's looked notably improved as a passer. Atlanta's the 2nd softest schedule adjusted matchup for opposing quarterbacks since week 5. And obviously, I mean, the pairing is just so easy. It's really only Cortland Sutton that needs to be talked about. He's been playing really well as of late. He actually led all wide receivers in ass last week in a very difficult matchup. And, you know, he's facing an Atlanta defense that's allowed the 4th most fantasy points per game to opposing wide receiver ones. Ryan, anything to add there on Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton? I have moderate interest. I'm not, really excited to play him, but yeah, how do you feel?
Yeah, I think Nix is fine. This is a good pressure matchup as well. The Falcons have really struggled to get pressure this year. And Nix, when he's pressured, when Nix is pressured, he ranks as the QB 33 by fantasy points per dropback. On unpressured dropbacks, that goes up to like the QB 12. So yeah, I think Nix is totally fine. He gives you the additional rushing element too. So yeah, Nix, Sutton, Devon Vele is maybe projecting for some ownership I've seen in some spots. I don't know. Like, it was his first game above a 60% route share last week. The only game by like any of these ancillary Broncos receivers above a 60% route share all season. So yeah, I don't know. I can't really get on to Devon Vele, but yeah, so probably just Nix and Sutton for me.
Yeah, I think in my notes I called Vele Tall Wandale. I'm not really excited about a guy who's running 65% of routes, has an ADOT of right around 6.5. Just not really seeing the downfield targets that you'd like to. We do have to give a quick shout to Audric Estime. Only 4,500 had, I believe, right here, 14 of 17 backfield carries, 65% of backfield XFP, 2 of 3 backfield red zone opportunities. Again, just 4,500. Obviously, plenty of risk with this play. Hilo, can I at all interest you in Audric Estime this week?
I think if his ownership stays at the current expectation, I think you can have some interest there. Sub 5% is a fine price to pay to speculate. Outside of that, you guys nailed it. It's basically Bo Nix and Cortland Sutton for me.
Yeah, I think if you're playing Estimate, it makes some sense to pair him with the Broncos defense. He's just total dust if the Broncos fall behind here. Only 3 routes last week. Did actually run more routes than Jaleel McLaughlin, and I think part of that is because Marvin Mims is starting to play some running back. He stole a couple backfield targets, which is, just hilarious. I wonder if Sean Payton's ever thought about playing Marvin Mims at wide receiver instead. That's an interesting
novel idea.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. All right, so moving on to our last game here, certainly the game of the week from a real football perspective, not necessarily from a fantasy perspective. Kansas City Chiefs at the Buffalo Bills. Chiefs are 2-point underdogs. Total here is 46. Dalton Kincaid is out due to a knee injury. Keon Coleman also out. Amari Cooper looks likely to play through the wrist injury that cost him the last 2 games, but he is officially questionable. Khalil Shakir is projecting well across the industry. He's projecting for pretty strong ownership. On top of that, my problem with Shakir is that his ADOT is just nothing. He's seeing targets 3.5 yards down the field. If you exclude Mecole Hardman, he has the lowest average depth of target of any wide receiver in the NFL. Hilo, how do you feel about the Khalil Shakir, likely chalk at 15 to 20% ownership?
There's a rule that has been extremely profitable that I've lived by throughout my DFS career. It's like, don't play slot wide receivers at chalk. And so it's really that simple. Slot wide receiver is going to play 60, 65, 70% of the offensive snaps at a low ADOT role. He obviously brings per target upside with his yak ability, but a lot has to go right for him to return a GPP viable score, particularly now that his price is up in the 6Ks on DK. So it's just an easy pass for me. If you want to go somewhere from this offense, like Amari Cooper, number 1, and then I think Dawson Knox is interesting at only 3,500 on DK. Can he outscore like Dalton Kincaid type lines? Maybe we'll see. I don't know, but he's 3,500. So
yeah. I'm right there with you. I think Knox pretty clearly my favorite play from the Bills side. If you want Shakir action, I would just bet the over on his prop, which I know Ryan highlighted in advanced matchups. On the Chiefs side, Ryan, we have the workload for Kareem Hunt that is just absolutely incredible. The same thing could be said for Travis Kelce, who is priced as the wide receiver 18 on DraftKings, but he's earned 18.6 expected fantasy points per game over the last month. That would actually be the 4th best workload among main slate eligible wide receivers. What are your thoughts on those two? And then any additional love for DeAndre Hopkins, who, looks to be a bit overlooked in this spot, I think.
Yeah, so pretty clearly my favorite play here is Kareem Hunt. He's one of the only running backs that I'm excited to get off the chalk for this week. So over his last 5 games, Hunt averaging over 21 expected fantasy points per game, just over 19 actual fantasy points per game, the single best XFP per dollar value on the slate. And it's because of this incredible goal line role that he has. Since he started being a full-time player, he's averaging 1.4 expected touchdowns per game. That's like 50% more than the next closest running back. 13 carries inside the 5-yard line over that span since week 5. The next closest only has like 7. So yeah, if you just play out the thought experiment of how does a Christian McCaffrey or a Devon Achane fail, it's because they didn't score multiple touchdowns and some other running back did. And just by far the most likely to do that to me is Kareem Hunt. So yeah, if I'm making a bet off the running back chalk, Hunt is what I want to do. Additionally, like his passing game usage was incredible last week. 4 design targets. The Bills have been kind of the running back funnel in the passing game all season, by far the most schedule adjusted to running backs through the air. So yeah, I'm a little surprised that the projected ownership is so low on Hunt. I get that it's Kareem Hunt, but I don't know. I don't think for a play like this that you need like the rushing efficiency on the ground, which I'm not expecting whatsoever out of Kareem Hunt at this point in his career. Kelce, I like the upside. Of course, you had to like Travis Kelce with the workload he's been seeing. A bit of a difficult schematic matchup. He has been significantly worse against too high this season, about 50% dock to his yards per out run against too high, which the Bills play at the 4th highest rate. But yeah, aside from that, I'm fine with playing Kelce. Like it's not like a circle spot for me, but totally respect the upside.
Yeah. I mean, the volume for Kelce has just been so damn good. I can't believe it's the year 2024 and we're still playing Kareem Hunt, but I'm right there with you, Ryan. I do think he's a pretty strong play. I mentioned that I thought DeAndre Hopkins was going a bit overlooked. I'm looking at industry ownership and seeing closer to 10 or 12%. I think I'm ready to peel off that take a bit if that's really what the ownership is going to be. Hilo, anything to add on the Chiefs side of this game before we get out of here?
No, man. Pretty much in lockstep with Ryan there.
All right. Awesome. Well, guys, stick around. Me and Ryan will be going live in about 20 minutes here for the Underdog Drafter Party. We'll be covering every angle of the Underdog Battle Royale slate. There are actually a lot of great contests this week, so certainly a show worth checking out. We can get to a lot more of your questions that we couldn't answer during Cashing Points. But yeah, thank you so much for tuning in to the Week 11 edition of Cashing Points. For Ryan, for Hilo, for producer Thomas behind the glass, we will see you guys at the top of the leaderboards. What?
Why are you shaking your head? You're welcome.